One of the big concerns is putting another layer on top of the existing networks from 4G to 5G. And one of the big concerns is, are people going to pay for it? You know, if you're driving a Chevy and you move to a Ferrari, you expect your car payment to go up. That's what we're doing here. We're taking your Chevy and we're giving you a Ferrari.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside.
Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Jay Klaus, and I'm accompanied by my co-host here at CES, Mr. New Apartment Who Dis himself, Eric Hornung.
Yeah, man, it's not even an apartment, man. I went suburban.
You went suburban?
I went suburban. We moved out of OTR and up to Oakley, and we have a 3-floor plus a basement house.
Wow.
It's got 1,800 square feet. It was built in 1921. It's got a fenced-in backyard and a garage. Man, I have done it. I have white flighted my way out of Cincinnati.
What are these floors going to be?
So the first floor is a dining room, which is a whole new experience for me, coming from Chicago and then New York, and then a smaller apartment in OTR. There's also the living room, which is actually, factually, bigger than my entire living space in New York, just the living room. Kitchen on the first floor, and then the second floor it's a 3-bedroom house. We turned one of them into my office. One of them is our bedroom. The only bathroom is on the second floor, which is a little bit of a downer.
One bathroom.
One bathroom, yeah. Older houses, that'll happen. And then the top floor is what we're calling the Thunderdome.
Is that what we're calling or what you're calling?
The jury is still out on that.
I don't see friend of the podcast, fiance of the podcast, calling it the Thunderdome.
Right. So it's a carpeted area upstairs in one of the traditional older houses that has the slanted ceilings. We put a bed up there for when we have guests. Hank loves to hang out up there. Colleen seems to think that my Call of Duty is going up there, but that is
not factually true.
The jury is out on that.
Where are you going to place your wireless router for optimal gaming results?
Well, for gaming, I'll have a hardline connection.
Okay.
So that's good.
That's necessary.
But for our wireless system, we're going to have a mesh router system because fast internet's so important to us.
Yeah. Well, I asked because I have a vested interest, and I want to make sure that our recording quality stays on the up and up.
Yeah, we still have the 500 megabyte package.
Not that you've ever been the offender. It's always been me trying to steal bar or neighbor Wi-Fi, which just isn't strong enough to conduct a podcast. Well, speaking of strong Wi-Fi signal, today we are speaking to Bryan Darr, the Executive Vice President of Smart Cities at Ookla, which is the company behind Speed Test. If you've ever tested your wireless or wired speed at speedtest.net, you've used an Ookla product. Bryan has spent most of his professional life in the wireless industry, beginning his career in cellular as a sales rep for Cellular One of Memphis in 1985. He started Mosaik in 1988 and began developing consumer roaming guides. We'll get into all of that, what that means in the interview, since that is probably not something you've spent any time thinking about if you're anything like me. In 2018, Mosaik was acquired by Ookla, which is where Bryan is today. Eric, we're sitting here at CES 2020. There are a lot of booths and panels and exhibits about smart city technology. We've talked to a couple of guests this week about it, and 5G is something that comes up a lot. I don't know what G means.
Generation.
Well, now I do. There's going to be a lot of basic questions like that and more as I talk to Bryan about this next generation of wireless technology.
So I'm coming into this interview with a lot of pessimism.
Pessimism?
Pessimism.
Okay, tell me more.
See, whenever something is buzzworded, it always makes me feel like maybe it's not the big thing yet. Maybe if you ask someone, why is 5G going to make a difference? I don't think most people who talk about 5G know why 5G is going to be important. And that means to me that, yeah, maybe it will be important one day, but maybe the impact in the near term isn't going to be as big as everyone's saying.
You think it's a marketing boondoggle? There's some sort of company that would stand to gain by 5G being a thing, and they're pushing it out?
Yeah, probably.
Smoke and mirrors? Well, I don't know anything about this. Even after spending 6 months working with our smart city team in Columbus, I didn't spend any time thinking about 5G or what the implications are, but you'll hear things from time to time of people being afraid of 5G. They're worried about the signal or radiation, or they're worried that we're going to fall behind China if we don't move on 5G more quickly, and I just have no idea what any of that means, what to be concerned about, and so I'm hoping that Bryan can help us separate the signal from the noise.
That was a very nice ending there, Jay. And if you guys like that ending, you can tweet at us and say, Jay, wow, you're really good with words, at Upside FM on Twitter, or you can send us something a little longer at hello@upside.fm.
I think I'll actually set up the email address, Jay, wow, you're really good with words, at upside.fm. So we can collect all those compliments. They won't fill up our inbox, but it's good to catalog them. All right, let's get into that interview with Bryan.
Eric, what is your favorite kind of pie?
Oh, dude, apple pie all day. Also, I'm kind of on the fence between apple pie and apple crumble, and are they the same thing or are they different? Either way, they're both delicious. A little scoop of vanilla ice cream, caramel. I bet you didn't think you were going to get that much of an answer from me on that one.
A lot of detail, so I want you to imagine a pie chart, and we'll even make it an apple pie chart. Let's cut that apple pie in half. 50% of it is technical recruiting, 25% of it is executive search, and 25% of it is sales, marketing, and product. That is the breakdown of the different types of searches done by our friends over at Integrity Power Search, the #1 full-stack, high-growth startup recruiting firm between the coasts. They partner with venture capitalists, private equity groups, and CEOs to build amazing teams for the world's most disrupting companies. 50% of their searches are technical recruiting, 25% executive search, and 25% sales, marketing, and product. So if you are hiring, dear listener, I would get a hold of Integrity Power Search.
How would you do that, Jay?
Just go to upside.fm/integrity to learn more about what they do and how you can get involved. That's upside.fm/integrity.
It seems to me like you led with pie, and I don't get any pie. Am I losing on this one?
You are getting no real pie. It was simply a visualization.
Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me today.
On Upside, we like to start with a background of the guest. So can you tell us about the history of Bryan? Take us on a quick rocket ship.
Well, currently with Ookla, the folks behind Speed Test. I think a lot of people know what Speed Test is. A lot of people keep it on their phones. But as far as my background is concerned, I actually started out in the wireless industry back in 1985. I had the opportunity to start selling phones when they first started coming out, and they were just car phones. And then the next year, we were allowed to sell the portables for $5,000 a piece, if you think about that. About 3 years into it, I realized my customers were having trouble using their phones when they traveled. And so I created a booklet that would actually tell them how to do that and tell them what cities they could go to, because you used to have a roamer access number, a port that would allow people, you would have to dial it, like dialing a pager, for those people who know what a pager is now.
Before my time.
And then you'd either get a series of beeps or a secondary dial tone, and then you'd enter the customer's mobile number that you were trying to reach. Because if they were in Chicago, but they were traveling to Dallas, completely different area codes, there wasn't any way for the network to know where you were. And ultimately, they figured out a way for the network to be able to autonomously register the device, and now your calls follow you. But we printed those booklets for about 10 years. But during that period, we got into mapping, because we had people say, well, you seem to know where all these networks are. So I started a company called American Roamer back in 1988 and built a business on those roaming guides. But we, about 3 years into that, got into mapping. We're just collecting all the coverage that the carriers were stating, where they believed they had coverage all over the country. And eventually we did that all over the world. We rebranded to Mosaik about 10 years ago. And then Mosaik became part of Ookla June of 2018. So that's kind of a brief history on me and my background.
I think back to my first cell phone, and I was like 15. It would have been early 2000s. And just the way that cell phones have changed since then blows my mind. So if you're playing around with cell phones back in 1985, How have you kept up with like the pace of change of mobile communication? Like, what do you have to do to stay on top of these things?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's anything that'll date a movie more nowadays than seeing someone on one of those old big Motorola brick phones, right? Particularly something like Wall Street or whatever. It's kind of fun to see that. But yeah, it has been astonishing, all of the things that the phones can do now and what it has replaced for us, right? This show that we're at here at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, you now have your calculator, your camera, your games, whatever, all right here in a single device. Your flashlight, right?
Communication device, the internet. I'm tweeting out of the show, and
that's right. And so it's pretty astonishing. In the beginning there was voice. I've always enjoyed pointing out that was the killer app. Okay, back in 1983 when the first networks launched in Chicago and Washington, D.C. And then, the networks just grew and grew and grew on the old AMPS network, or I guess we would call that 1G at this point, but it was analog. And then as 2G came along and all of a sudden we could send messages to one another. Wow, that was pretty cool, right? Email was clunky. You could take a photograph, but don't try to upload it. On some phones, by the way. Only some of them had cameras. So this evolution that we have seen has been nothing short of astonishing, that it's taken this short a period of time, frankly, to see it evolve to the degree that it has.
We've seen it evolve over these last 30 years so much. Do you think that it will evolve more in the next 30 years than it has in the last 30?
I think that we could see an even shorter span of time for the same level of evolution. It's we tend to think about sort of where we are today, and for most people in their busy daily lives, they don't sit down and spend a whole lot of time really thinking about what they may have a financial plan that they want to target for 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, but in terms of how the world has changed, what kind of job they might have 5 or 10 or 20 years from now as opposed to what they do today, most people don't really have even time to sit back and think about it and worry about it. There's an awful lot of taxi drivers here in Vegas. It's a really interesting market because the taxi drivers have a very strong political voice here. But what's autonomous cars ultimately going to do to the taxi industry here and all over the world? And you think about the freedom that's going to bring. I've got two family members. I mentioned this on a panel yesterday. I've got two family members that are both low vision, that suffer from low vision. Neither one of them can drive. One's effectively blind. And what the cell phone has done, what podcasts have done, okay? It was books on tape, and now you've got this explosion of additional content who's for someone who can't see very well. Okay, who can still enjoy and absorb information and get the news and all these other things that they really couldn't do before. It's going to be, I think, an amazing time for people with disabilities. But those technologies ultimately will be adopted by other people to do a variety of other things. I think of what we saw with 4G, the most amazing thing to me was what navigation did. You can trace navigation to those Uber and Lyft vehicles that are running around, to your ability to just plug an address into your phone or into your car for that matter and have it take you, tell you turn by turn where to go. You're going to see that happen indoors. It's one of the things that I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see retailers make it easier for us to find that item that, I don't know about you guys, but my wife invariably, when she's cooking something for a party, she says, you need to go to the store and pick up X. And I'm like, what is that? Where do you find that? I have no idea. Ask me where the barbecue sauce is, and I can tell you.
There's a whole shelf of it.
Well, I'm from Memphis, so yeah, we know exactly, everybody in Memphis knows where the barbecue sauce is. So that's pretty, I think that in-building navigation that we're seeing a little bit here in our own CES app right now, I think it's just going to evolve. You see glasses out here on the floor, wearable, with a camera in it that is going to, and will actually present to you in your vision, the direction to turn and tell you where to go. I mean, these are amazing things.
So To ask a very basic question, you mentioned 1G, 2G, we jumped to 4G. What is an increase in a G? Does that just mean generation? And what does a new generation of technology allow for? You mentioned that 4G allowed for navigation. Why? What about that made navigation possible? And eventually we'll tie this into 5G, but to first catch people up to speed who don't spend as much time in this.
Fair enough. The devices have been able to use GPS, the constellation of satellites, for quite some time. It was originally a military function, right? The U.S. military didn't let anybody have access to it until I think it was the Clinton administration, and you had limited access to it. You didn't get very good resolution or granularity on your location, exactness, if that's a better word. And so when that opened up, then that provided, you've really got about 7 meters of accuracy outdoors that allows you to know, yes, I'm on this street, okay? I'm traveling down this street. And the device is being smart enough to not only be able to pinpoint where you are in space, but also be able to provide information on your rate of speed, on your acceleration, okay? To be able to then follow that and present that to you on a map. And having enough bandwidth that as we moved into 4G and the ability to pass a significantly more information than 3G could back and forth, then allows it to paint the picture of that map on your phone and then interact as you see that Uber vehicle or that Lyft vehicle, coming towards you. Or a delivery van. A lot of services now, will send you a link and you can go follow the delivery van to your house, okay? We're going to see more and more of that. In order to be able to communicate, in order to be able to pass back and forth that amount of information, you just have to have a lot more bandwidth than 3G allowed for. In 5G, as they have opened up not only more and more spectrum, but the equipment, the technology is allowing for more efficient use of the spectrum that's already there, then the capability of 5G is going to allow the amount of data to pass back and forth explode. And the other thing that's going to be a really important distinction with 5G is latency. Now, all the gamers listening to this podcast know exactly what I'm talking about, all right? Because you will die in your favorite single-person shooter game. You will die, a group, you know what I'm talking about. In a big group game, if that guy has got better connectivity and lower latency than you do, you're toast, okay? You're not going to survive very long.
Unless you got 1G, because then you skip around the map.
So you've got, yes, it's going to bring a much better gaming experience. You're going to be able to see a massive amount of data for that true realism be passed back and forth at a higher level. But think about how that then translates to other types of applications that we're going to see in the real world. I was talking about navigation, the ability to walk down a street in New York City, or let's say you go up to a place where you don't know the language. You take a trip to Paris, okay? You take your partner to Paris with you, you want to have a good time, but you don't know your way around, you don't speak French. A lot of people in France do speak English, but not all of them want to speak English to you. All right, it's a wonderful country, and they're actually quite accommodating. But you'll be able to navigate and have turn-by-turn directions, not just on your phone, but actually in your vision. Imagine a map that drops points of places of interest, and whether it's restaurants like Yelp, okay, or whether you would just want to be able to see the museums, you're going to have the opportunity to go navigate a foreign country without having to constantly stop and figure out if someone speaks your language or not. And if they don't speak your language, and you want to converse with them, that universal translator that Star Trek thought up back in the 1960s that was big, okay, and clunky, is now just going to be another app in your phone and connectivity at a very high speed that's going to allow you to converse without a significant delay. Part of the reason this is going to happen this way, and we're going to see 5G roll out, and 5G is going to be a true evolution. AT&T's has drawn some fire because they've put 5GE displayed on their phones, and it's not really 5G. But I will say this much, the evolution aspect of it, I think, is very accurate, in that what we're going to see is that as 5G comes out, it's actually going to get better in some respects. So I work for Ookla. We're seeing speed tests that are crazy, okay? 1 gig, 1.5 gig, 2 gigs of throughput.
That's crazy.
I mean, it's crazy.
Jay, you used to get like 10 megs.
It was bad.
What do you need that for? Okay. The important thing to remember is that the speeds that we saw on the 4G networks in some respect when they first came out were actually higher than what most people experience because the networks weren't loaded up. How many people have a 5G phone? I don't know what the number is right now either, but I'll guarantee you it's less than 5% of the users out there, okay? Every day that's going to increase as people go in and swap out their phones if they're on Android until Apple pushes out a 5G capable phone. Then the people updating to the new iPhone 11, they're not going to have actual true 5G coverage. But that should be coming, I hope, later this year. And so you'll see those people that are on 5G are going to have crazy, stupid network speeds. But as that network gets loaded up, then it will become more reasonable in the numbers that you're seeing. But I do think that what we're going to see is somewhere around in the areas where they're launching millimeter wave, I'll get to that in a moment, right? Where they're launching millimeter wave, we're going to see fairly consistent speeds at 10 times or so what you're experiencing on 4G.
So we hear the promise of 5G, and we've heard it for a couple of years now here at CES.
Right.
What is stopping that evolution and mass availability tomorrow? With all this promise, you would think that people would want that. So is it just some necessary pace of rolling it out, or are there hurdles to actually getting this in the hands of people?
Well, it's a number of different things. There's a lot of things that actually have to happen in order to bring this magic, out to people and businesses, right? The government has to provide spectrum. Our government has done that. Not all countries around the world have had spectrum made available yet, or have just made it available to companies for them to launch 5G. Because there's not enough capacity on their current spectrum for them to go launch it without negatively impacting their 4G customers, okay? So the spectrum's the first thing. Obviously, you have to have investment. This is expensive, right? These companies are going to spend billions and billions of dollars adding to this network. And one of the big concerns is putting another layer on top of the existing networks from 4G to 5G. And one of the big concerns is, are people going to pay for it? If you're driving a Chevy and you move to a Ferrari, you expect your car payment to go up. That's what we're doing here. We're taking your Chevy and we're giving you a Ferrari. And how much money are people going to be willing to pay for that experience? It is the experience ultimately that is what people are paying for.
So if I am an AT&T customer, how much proportionally, regardless of telephone carrier, how much proportionally do you think somebody's monthly cell phone bill would increase if they're going from 4G to 5G?
Well, now there are some analysts in the industry that could probably do a far better job of answering that question than I can, okay? But in terms of what the carriers have at least attempted to push out and test the waters with is an extra $10 a month, but it's going to ultimately, they're going to have to do a little bit of testing the waters and see what it is people are willing to pay for. People have been getting phones for effectively free, okay, almost free. It's not necessarily a very good phone. Samsung Galaxy 10 comes out, and it's a hugely popular phone. It's $1,000. It's over $1,000. I just bought my son one for Christmas. That's really what he wanted for Christmas. So I know exactly what they cost. And the new iPhone, is a similar price point. There are people willing to spend that money. So, but you asked what was necessary to make all of this happen. I mentioned spectrum, I mentioned investment from the operators, but you also have infrastructure. In order to be able to deliver these kinds of speeds, you can't just go put a stick in the ground, wrap some antennas on the top of it, plug it into the electrical system, and boom, you've got 5G, or 4G for that matter. You've actually got to have fiber all the way to the antenna with 5G. So if you are in an area that does not have a significant amount of fiber capacity, then you can put all the 5G antennas in that you want, but you're not going to realize the kind of experience that 5G ultimately can promise, okay? So either building out a broadband network where it doesn't exist at all, okay, in the ground, fiber in the ground type thing, as well as being able to increase the capacity within the areas that have a very dense population. There may already be fiber in an area, but fiber typically doesn't run up and down every street. Even in big cities, it's very disruptive. They tear up sidewalks and streets to put it in, okay? But that's exactly what's going to be needed in order to be able to bring this technology forward. You've got low-band spectrum, mid-band spectrum, high-band spectrum. Low-band spectrum is what cellular was initially launched with. The mid-band spectrum is what we saw as the PCS players started rolling out, what are now Sprint and T-Mobile, pretty much. But some of the spectrum is owned by AT&T and Verizon. And remember, you have small rural operators out there as well that provide a lot of coverage in this country, where the big players either don't provide coverage at all or provide it very sketchily. So that's, I think they often don't get a whole lot of recognition. People don't necessarily know who they are, but if you're driving to the Grand Canyon on vacation, if you're driving to Glacier National Park, you're going to be on one of these operators at one point. You might not even know it, but you will. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into making what we have today available and a lot of players. The fiber, though, is going to be critical, and within rural parts of the country, there's very little fiber.
And the fiber would be a private operator like these cable companies. It's not the municipality, for example, that's responsible for it.
There are hundreds of fiber players out there. AT&T and Verizon own a tremendous amount of fiber, but they by no means command the market share on that they do within the mobile space, within the wireless space. But within big cities, you're going to see very high band spectrum rolling out, and that's what Verizon's already doing. And if you go look at their coverage maps, you kind of scratch your head and go, what? Because there's only a few blocks that end up getting covered, okay? What Sprint rolled out was mid-band spectrum. Its coverage is significantly larger, and what T-Mobile's been rolling out right now is on low-band spectrum. So the speed improvements that you're seeing as you go to 5G within these rural areas on the low-band spectrum are better, but it's not the kind of 10 times jump that you're going to see, okay, because it's low band. And all of these carriers ultimately are going to use a mix. Within the big cities where you have this millimeter wave or very high band spectrum, it travels a very short distance but has an enormous capacity capability. It can really grab a lot of data and shove it through the pipe very fast. And so that's what you need in an area where you've got thousands of people within a few square blocks, okay? That's not necessarily what you have to have in South Dakota, okay? You can still get a very good experience because there's going to be a lot fewer people on the network. But those are, as talking about spectrum though, those are the types of differences. And AT&T, what AT&T has just launched on 5G is, largely on their low and mid-band spectrum, I believe. So, but we're going to see ultimately all of the operators providing these different tools. It's like tools in a toolbox. Within this type of area where you have a very, very dense population, that's what you're going to need. You're going to need that high band spectrum with an overlay of the other bands. But it's not practical for a signal that only travels 2 blocks to be pushed out into a rural area.
There's a eventual maturation of, okay, we laid out this high band, mid band, low band, and we've done it, right? How long until we're there?
Well, there are other factors that are impacting this. So when you're talking about the low band spectrum, like T-Mobile has rolled out a tremendous amount of the country on that very, very quickly. Okay, so that can happen faster. But the investment that Verizon is making right now, and that the others will follow with, what you're seeing is a difficulty in really getting all of these sites in block by block by block in cities. One of the projects I've been working on over the last year, that we've been working on with our partners at Deloitte, is a system that would actually allow municipalities to better deal with the massive influx of requests for permits for access to place poles in the right-of-way or to attach to existing poles that are in the city's right-of-way. Sometimes the cities own the poles, sometimes the utility companies own the poles. A few of these poles are, of course, still owned by people like AT&T, telecommunications companies that built them years ago. And so there's a mishmash of this out there, and you have to there's 3 things you have to have to be able to properly transmit a cellular signal, now aside from all of the radio equipment and so forth, in terms of the siting of that equipment, you've got to have height, you've got to have power, and you've got to have connectivity. Those are the three things that you've got to have. You cannot put these radios in the ground. Fiber can be buried, but the antennas that ultimately are going to connect with our mobile devices have got to be above ground. And millimeter wave, because it is so high frequency, it's very easy to interfere with it. If you had it down at eye level, then just a bus coming up alongside is going to interfere with the signal being able to reach the other side of the street. So trees even, they're having to plan the locations based upon how many trees that a city has actually planted along the sidewalks, or within a city park. And these trees grow and they change shape, and sometimes they get cut down and a different tree goes. So imagine, just with the traffic going up and down the street that's changing every moment, and then you have other things that change slowly over time, and all of these are going to ultimately impact the usability of a particular site and where it's placed. So it's all going to have to be watched carefully, and they're going to have metrics that tell them which sites are not working as well as they were intended to.
When do we know when it's time for 6G, and what does 6G look like?
Wow. That's, there are folks already talking about, working on the, some of the equipment and the theoretical aspects of it. These generations tend to roll over about every decade, okay? Now, the equipment continues to improve, and it's not that it doesn't get better, and of course the handsets get better, but I would expect that if the next significant change in all of this is going to be that you're referring to as 6G will probably be somewhere in a 10-year time frame. I'm not sure they're going to call it that. You've got the cable operators out there pushing 10G. But it means something very different. It's not a 10th generation, it's that they're now pushing 10 gig fiber connectivity to your home or business. And so when the marketing aspects of that start breaking down, you kind of wonder whether or not that pathway ultimately is going to hold
I'm
up.
still confused by the iPhone 10. iPhone 10, iPhone X? Before the iPhone 9? Anyway, what are the international implications of 5G? I hear some rumblings of the United States has to move faster on this because otherwise we'll fall behind, and what does that actually mean if some country says, what, we are going to put all in as a nation to get 5G ubiquitous?
Well, I'm so glad you asked the question, because it gives me a segue into saying that people should go check out our 5G deployment map, okay? We at Ookla put out a map that's just search for Ookla 5G map.
We will link to it in the show notes as well.
Great. And you'll be able to see where we've been able to track these networks, and we track them a couple of different ways. We actually collect information as the operators release that information, okay, and announce it. So we have a research team that tracks all of that. But of course we're also getting real-time information that's coming from people running speed tests. And some of the phones, by the way, have not been particularly good at distinguishing in the data that comes off of them whether or not it's actually a 4G network or a 5G network. But we've been able to define that. Our data scientists have been able to separate those types of tests out and be able to define whether with a high level of confidence if this is a 5G or a 4G test. Some of it, frankly, if you're getting 2 gig speed, okay, it's not 4G. Okay, to be fair, but that's already improving, and we're seeing the devices and the software in them, catching up to the ultimately the needs that these developers have, as well as what we need to measure this. The 5G map, you'll see that there's been an explosion of 5G here in North America, particularly as T-Mobile has covered so much of the country, and you've had these new launches. Verizon, hit their target of a little over 30 cities. AT&T's launched a couple of dozen or so cities here recently, I think middle of December. And so, we're starting to see that really happen in a big way. Switzerland and South Korea were the two countries that we saw a lot of really early activity in, and you'll see that on the map. There's a tremendous number of communities. Not, when people say they launched, a big city, did we launch New York or did we launch, Bonn, Germany or something. When it comes to 5G, that may only be a few blocks, depending upon what they've used, what spectrum they've used for that initial rollout. Okay, but we're starting to see Germany. We're seeing testing in the UK. We're seeing lots of places in Europe. But go out there and take a look at the map. There's some pretty significant countries, France, that don't have any 5G launches at this point. And that can be impacted, as I said before, by whether the spectrum has been made available or how long it's been available for the companies to actually get it implemented, as well as in the types of investment that's needed in this very new, pretty expensive technology. So at this point, in developing countries, really across Central and South America, we're seeing very little activity. Across most of Africa, we're seeing very little activity. Middle East, on the other hand, the Arabian Peninsula, go check out the map. I think you'll find it really interesting.
Is there any geopolitical implication of that? If a country is just like fully operating on 5G, are they going to have a higher rate of financial transactions so that they can just like trade at a higher rate? I don't know what the implications are, but is there any, is what I'm asking.
Certainly there are implications to this. And you're going to be able to provide these types of services to people. I was talking about the translation a few minutes ago. You can kind of do it on 4G now, but it's clunky and it's not awesome, right? You're going to have an enormous amount of distinction in one country to another as far as the types and levels of services that you got. But you have that today. You've got a lot of countries around the world where 4G hasn't been rolled out, or certainly doesn't even have the bandwidth. Even if they have a 4G signal, if the bandwidth isn't there to support it, then there are certain things you just can't do. Now, we saw mobile banking roll out over Africa, okay, using text messages because they were effectively unbanked. And so they skipped over 100 years of wired telephone service technology, certainly throughout the rural areas of Africa and other parts of the world, Asia, South America, to suddenly have a technology. And they implemented stuff that we still have a lot of people in this country that don't use the mobile banking apps that are now available on your phones, okay? They're just not comfortable with it, they're not used to it. So it's always going to be varying levels of adoption, and ultimately that's a big part of it, is how quickly will the public take it up? How quickly will they bring in their devices and upgrade them? Because I don't care what that iPhone says. If it says 5GE on there, it's not 5G. And that phone will never, if the phones that you're running around with today from Apple or the older Android phones are never going to pick up 5G. You will have to upgrade your equipment if you haven't already.
Bryan, this has been awesome. Thanks for sharing so much with us. If people want to learn more about you or Ookla after the show, where should they go?
Well, you can go to ookla.com. You can go to speedtest.com. We have another site, also Mosaik.com, which was the company that I ran for 30 years that's now part of Ookla. A lot of our information about coverage mapping and things like that are out there as well. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you today. It's been a great show so far.
Hey listener, have you ever wanted to get a message in front of the Upside audience but weren't sure how to sponsor this show or weren't able to do a long-term sponsorship? Well, now you can just go to upside.fm/classifieds and let our audience know anything that's going on in your world, whether it's an event, an application, a special coupon or deal, or just letting them know who you are, what your company does. All you have to do is go to upside.fm/classifieds and you can place an ad on this show. That's upside.fm/classifieds.
All right, Jay, we just spoke with Bryan Darr of Ookla. Fast, give me your quick thoughts.
This is going to take a while. It's going to take a while to roll all this out. I've heard some horror stories of companies that were trying to install fiber into cities and even would do it for free to kind of test new methods, and cities would take that on. Was that Louisville where we heard that story? Talking with the Chief Innovation Officer of Louisville on a trip a few months back. Sounded like there was some real downside to botched fiber efforts. And if 5G is dependent on, first of all, multiple layers of players here, love rhymes, a lot of dominoes to fall over, and if the last domino is actually installing cable in all of these very specific geographic areas at scale, just sounds like a big undertaking.
Yeah, it's a huge capital expenditure for all of these companies, And I think Bryan said there's over 19,000 municipalities in the United States, which is something that we've talked about before with Astral AR and maybe a few other companies. That's just a lot of stakeholders to buy into this idea. Even at using the 80-20 rule, I mean, 20% of 20,000 is still a lot of town hall meetings to go to.
Right. And on the other side of the coin, though, I'll be driving along and I'll look up at the telephone poles and I just think, is this really still the way we're doing this? We've just got miles and miles and miles of cables just being strung through the air. In a future where things are laid underground and maybe we clean all that up, maybe 5G is the impetus to start putting all this underground.
Didn't Bryan talk about poles in the interview and how they are owned by various parties? It made me feel like I don't think the poles are going away. And fiber maybe can be strung?
It seems like antennas aren't going to go away. But I think wires have got to go. They got to go. I'm just sick of wires.
All right, Jay's anti-wire. You guys heard it here first on the Upside podcast.
Something that Bryan brought up off air, actually, as we were just kind of talking, in the intro, we talked about fears around radiation and signals going through the air. He shared some pretty compelling statistics about the actual wattage of some of these 5G signals compared to other basic technologies that you have in your home, microwaves, for example, or the science behind the further away your phone is from a receiving tower, the harder your phone has to work and the more wattage it is putting out. So you actually are better off being closer to towers. Interesting ideas that, I hope that education can make the rounds. If this is something that the country is going to invest in, that cities are going to invest in, it sounds like there's a lot of historical baggage as far as how we think about things that needs to change, and hopefully that happens.
When we bring this back to the core of Upside, thinking about founders building companies outside of Silicon Valley, one of the questions we've been asking lately is, why now? Why is right now the right time for this company? And I think about a couple of just technologies that couldn't have existed before that first spectrum opened up. GPS, for example. Google Maps bought a promising startup that kind of commercialized the first GPS, and that is the foundation of Google Maps. I think YouTube is another example where the founder had the idea for YouTube for so long, and at his pitch to Sequoia or whoever it was, he explained how this new bandwidth that was opening up was going to actually allow for the idea to become reality because there would be enough bandwidth with all the new whatever technological infrastructure was in place. So my question with 5G is, what does it allow to be new or different that 4G doesn't besides having more data?
Right. There's got to be something that we can experience even nearer to real time that we don't even realize that we're missing. Or maybe we do realize that it's missing.
And maybe that's just something as simple as AR and VR right now are this kind of pie in the sky. They take up too much. There's too much going on with it. And I can't even use... So Google Maps right now has an AR function on its turn-by-turn directions for when you're walking. And I can't use it because it kills my battery so fast by sucking up so much data, by doing all of this stuff. So maybe in a world of 5G, that's just like no different than sending a text message.
What I'm really looking forward to is, with 5G, I will instantaneously receive all of those emails saying, wow, Jay, you are really good with words.
Oh man, we're still on this.
There will be no latency between a listener sharing that compliment and me receiving it. So that's a future that I can really look forward to.
And if that's a future you can look forward to, you can hit us up on Twitter at UpsideFM, or you could send us an email at hello@upside.fm. Jay, I don't think you're actually going to set up that inbox, are you? Please say you're not.
I will.
Okay. So you can send a email to Jay, you're really good with words, at UpsideFM if you want to tell Jay that, or if you just want to troll him. We will see you next week.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside Podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming, find a way and get it.